In regards to spirituality in the NICU, there's much less research exploring this. My team and I are some of the first to do so by understanding how parents experience religion and spirituality in the NICU. There's very little data, just how do the religious and spiritual lenses relate to their experience in the NICU. And what we found on previous studies are parents who felt anger or abandoned at God, considered negative religious coping, they experienced poor family cohesion, excuse me, while in the NICU, and also report higher experiences of denial. So it appears that there's a relationship there between negative forms of religious coping and maladaptive or not helpful forms of what we consider to be secular coping. We also found that parents who endorsed religiousness and spirituality to be important in their lives were able to also indicate that their spirituality and religiousness grew as a result of their experience, and could help them to be able to cope more effectively with this NICU experience during and post-discharge. So these studies were pilot studies that we worked on with families, a small sample of families during their process in the NICU, their time in the NICU and post-discharge. And so these were qualitative and quantitative analyses that we were able to undertake. Excuse me. Further, we also found that parents who reported greater spiritual struggles with a challenged sense of self, sense of life meaning, excuse me, as reflected through their spirituality, also had difficulty with emotional and cognitive well-being. And so this is a study currently under review. Basically, we wanted to break down this idea of negative religious coping into more specifics related to spiritual struggles. Spiritual struggles have been pretty well explored at this point. It is pretty conclusive that when you have greater spiritual struggles, your psychological outcomes are poorer. That's pretty consistent. But we don't know what that looks like with NICU families. And in particular, this sense of meaning and purpose appears to be the stronger factor in relationship to emotional and cognitive well-being for NICU families, which makes sense conceptually. We also found that parents who reported greater post-traumatic growth post-NICU discharge reported higher sanctification of their parent-child relationship, even when accounting for stress. So what this means is that we took a very small sample of NICU parents, asked them about their post-traumatic growth. So after a perceived trauma, do you experience a sense of growth in regards to the positive outcomes, essentially psychologically? Positive outcomes. So just because people are highly stressed doesn't mean that there can't be some positive outcomes. So one of the frameworks that we utilize to understand more about relationship functioning as well as co-parenting is the relational spirituality framework. And this is related to Mahoney's work, in which there is a discussion related to the formation, maintenance, and transformation of familial relationships in relation to one's spirituality and religion, particularly in relation to beliefs, thoughts, and emotions. And so it appears that, to quote Mahoney and Boyasis in 2019, relational spirituality refers to when the search for the sacred is united, for better or for worse, with the search for relationships. And so we really were interested in contextualizing some relational outcomes in this idea that your relationship with your partner can be a conduit for both degradation or growth of your religion and spirituality, or religious and spiritual behaviors, thoughts, and emotions are integral to your familial relationships and being able to feed those or, again, to degrade those. So, again, we're not going to suggest directionality here, but we do think that it's very important to understand how relationships are integral in one's religion and spirituality. Our current study aims were to explore the connections between relationship satisfaction with parents, co-parenting, and religious and spirituality factors. So particularly we're interested in what's called a concept called spiritual disclosure and religious coping. We also wanted to explore connections between relationship satisfaction and co-parenting and parent psychological well-being. So for example, that includes anxiety and stress related to NICU experience and depression. Mothers who had preterm births in between 2015 and 2016, we collected their data from the Pennsylvania Bureau of Health Statistics. So this was a statewide study. We were able to send out over 1,000 self-report questionnaires to mothers. And the way this worked was we only could gather contact information from mothers. That's all that's collected from the Bureau of Health Statistics. And the only way you can contact them is via mail. So we had to send out a survey to them. And therefore, we had an approximately 11.8% return rate with 121 families. So when we sent out the survey, we also sent out a separate survey if there was a father, either as a relationship partner, romantic relationship partner, spouse, or a co-parent. And so we asked for both mothers and fathers to complete surveys and send them back to us. In order to be included in the study, the infant had to have be born between what's considered a premature birth. We did not want to go below a 26-weeker, however, because the implications for those babies is medically and their outcomes are much poorer. So we were trying to gather data just for 27 weeks and above. We also were looking at parents who were fluent in English, and exclusion criteria were anyone under the age of 18, because we do, again, believe teen pregnancies yield a different set of issues and things we need to look at. We didn't really want the parent to be currently pregnant also, because we wanted them to be able to reflect on their previous pregnancy. And we also were really interested in babies that, we didn't want to have any congenital abnormalities or significant medical issues with babies that would result for them back into the NICU, or the PICU, post-discharge. So anything that was foreseen, any congenital abnormalities. We were also trying to avoid any type of psychiatric conditions with parents that would also be large factors in relationship to some of their psychological outcomes. For measures, as I said, we looked at religious coping. So we were interested in what we consider to be negative and positive religious coping factors. We looked at the brief RCOPE. And for spiritual disclosure, which is just this idea of openly sharing religious and spiritual beliefs with a partner, we looked at a spiritual disclosure scale. For psychological well-being, we looked at stress related to the Stanford Acute Stress Reaction Questionnaire, revised for the NICU experience. And for anxiety, we were looking at the Penn State Worry Questionnaire. For depression, we looked at the CSDR, Centers for Epidemiological Studies, Depression Scale Revised. And then for relational measures, we looked for co-parenting related to the co-parenting relationship scale by Feinberg et al., and the relationship assessment scale for relationship satisfaction. In the end, we had 162 parents, 110 mothers, 50 fathers, and I apologize for that, that's a typo. And two, non-biological fathers with a mean age of 32 years. And they completed these questionnaires post-discharge. So parents responded when their children were between 2 and 32 months of age, 2 months, and 32 months of age, with an average of approximately 13.8 months post-NICU discharge. So about a year after discharge is when most respondents filled out questionnaires. Infants were hospitalized, on an average of 33 days. So that's around, 3 weeks if you think of 3+ weeks. And infants were born on average of 32 weeks. So again, these weren't very, very young babies. But as you can see, the range was 24 to 39 weeks gestation. And on average, they were born at 3.6 pounds. I also forgot to mention that. So although I do want to say this, so we did have, in regards to acquiring participants in the study, as you can see, we did have a few babies that were born earlier than the 27-week mark, and we did allow them to be in the study just because of numbers. So the demographics, a large portion of our sample was married, 88%, 12% were living with a partner. And as you can see here, the self-rated extent of religious and spirituality, we asked people to indicate how religious or spiritual they were. And as you can see here, for none all the way up to high rates of spirituality, and similarly none to all high rates of religiousness. About 38% were indicating that they were moderate to highly religious, and about 48% were indicating they were highly to moderate spiritual. And then you did have a group that were indicating they were not religious or spiritual. You also can see here that most participants indicated they had a Protestant religious affiliation. However, we also had a group of individuals who indicated being atheist, agnostic, or having no religious affiliation.